Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. Let me start by wishing all of you a very happy new year. 2025 is a square year. I think many of us are going to see it only once in our lifetime. What is a square year? Look it up or multiply 45 by 45. But it's interesting for another reason, isn't it? 2025 marks the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. Those of us who have lived through the Y2K panic, it's hard to believe that we are in our 25th year of the 21st century. If you ask me, it's a time for serious introspection. And we have a trigger for all of this. The passing away of former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in India, President Jimmy Carter in the United States at the age of 91 and 100 respectively, has actually done that in December last year because it brought back memories of a different time, of leaders who were selfless, who worked for the people, and who lived in much more decent times when people were less angry, less abusive. In fact, there's such an uncanny similarity between the two leaders. Both were known for their innate decency, honesty, and their departure has led to a wave of nostalgia about the decline in politics, public service, and of course, public discourse. For this video, I'm sticking to India. There's a lot for us to think about. In fact, amidst the eulogies about Dr. Singh's long years of public service, no one wanted to point out that his second term actually ended in policy paralysis and what was considered a highly corrupt coalition government with the United Progressive Alliance UPA2's partners all bent on enriching themselves at the cost of the country. These allegations weren't untrue. A huge chunk of bad loans written off by banks on account of infrastructure and realty companies after 2014 actually stemmed from dubious lending and evergreening that happened earlier in UPA2. Both these sectors especially took advantage of the pump priming and liquidity infusion that was needed after the global financial crisis of 2008. But it continued for too long, and the evergreening happened, led to high inflation in 2011. And then many of these industrialists, some of them have just vanished, dumped their bad loans on banks in tens of thousands of crores. They collapsed, but banks were left with the bad loans. And one segment that was badly hit, that is still struggling, is homeowners and those who were subcontractors to these businesses. In fact, they sort of collapsed after a period of time, so it doesn't get reflected back to what happened pre-2014. The wave of nostalgia that harks back to 1991 is also extremely well justified. At that time, Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, and India was forced to open up and liberalize the economy, and a professional like him was brought in to do the job. It has been correctly argued that Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao provided the political cover for this huge structural changes, liberalization, and openness that was started in 1991, at least for the first 100 days. After all, the opposition to this liberalization was huge. And we have reported and lived through that time, came from three very powerful groups that had a lot to lose. First, the communist parties. There were many more of them in parliament, and they dictated a lot of things that happened. Huge allegations about a sellout to the World Bank. Then, of course, there were the old school industrialists, those who thrived in the license Raj. That was a story I broke. I called them the Bombay Club. The name stuck. And they got together, met in Bombay at the Oberoi Hotel, as it was then called, and wanted to protest against liberalization and reforms, which they thought would put them at a disadvantage. In fact, many of them have succeeded in the new world. And then there was the bunch of stockbrokers. Stockbrokers used to be very powerful those days. They controlled the exchanges. They had access to all the politicians, even though the market itself was very small and the number of investors relatively tiny as compared to today. In this situation, only a person with Dr. Singh's background, his erudition, his academic record, his professional record, and his high ethical standards could have pulled off the structural change that happened despite a massive security scam, which itself was a trigger for a lot of changes and for the Securities and Exchange Board of India getting its statutory teeth. And of course, there was this controversial power sector reform entirely dictated by Enron in the name of public-private partnerships. We are still paying a price for that. But in all this, we reformed, we changed forever. We got rid of all the long queues, and we are in a new India post that period. As we begin 2025, the nostalgia for leaders like Dr. Singh refocuses our attention on things that truly mattered, because all this was pulled off with utmost decency. So, what he has shown 10 years later is what could be done, high rate of growth that could be achieved, and then the last 10 years, where you had this orchestrated drumbeat about reform, development, Viksit Bharat, which often masks the challenges that are holding India back. And let's have no doubts, India is still being held back. In fact, public anger about it, about what seems like lost opportunities, is spilling out into the open. In fact, India's economic growth slowed to 5.4% in the July-September quarter last year, which is a 2-year low. According to media reports, the Finance Ministry attributes this to the Reserve Bank of India's tight monetary policy. So pass the blame. And this performance, low growth coupled with a weak rupee, naturally draws unfavorable comparisons with UPA 2, which the same government which is in power today called the most corrupt government. That's why, in retrospect, as Dr. Manmohan Singh correctly said, history is remembering him differently, in fact, with a lot of love, affection, and nostalgia for that time. It's perhaps Dr. Singh's demise that has also emboldened a lot of people. So a responsive government should be listening to these voices because people are speaking out now. And a government that listens to feedback, listens to the growing frustration about quality of life and corruption is likely to change, especially when this criticism or plea is coming from very vocal supporters. One of them who really surprised social media was TV Mohandas Pai. Very, very strong supporter who goes after people who criticize the government. He, as you know, was former CFO of Infosys. Last week, he posted on X tagging the Prime Minister and various ministers, Finance Minister, where he said, and I quote, "India needs urgent reforms to improve quality of life in her cities and towns. High corruption, bad infra is hurting citizens. Budget 2025 should provide huge funding for our cities." Small criticism, but use the C word, corruption, quality of life in cities. This is what taxpayers are beginning to ask. Then there was leading banker and industry stalwart Uday Kotak. What he said is making news. He was once the go-to person for the National Democratic Alliance. He has posted on X with 10 bold suggestions for India at 77. India at 77? I mean, we are not celebrating Independence Day. So obviously, for the new year, his response is to things that are happening. Now, I'm not going to go into the list of 10. You can look up his tweet. But the first on his list is go for growth. It's a clear reference to the economic slowdown and high unemployment that the country is facing. I believe the chambers of commerce are also pointing this out. Uday Kotak's list itself seems like a plea to give India's 1.4 billion people and its entrepreneurs a chance to flower and grow by getting, his words, enterprise and the animal spirits firing. In order to achieve this, he wants the government to eliminate current account deficit, continue steady fiscal consolidation, shun protectionism, respect free and fair markets, avoid overregulation and micromanagement across sectors. Tall order, no strategy, but avoid micromanagement. Remember, this was the 2014 promise, less government. Hasn't happened. Another blunt suggestion from Uday Kotak is to walk the talk on pollution. He's actually said that, walk the talk. This is a telling comment since Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which was led and launched by Prime Minister himself in October 2014, was supposed to have made India clean by 2019 when we were celebrating the centenary of the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. Mr. Kotak is perhaps the first high profile businessman to publicly acknowledge the embarrassment of India having the most polluted cities in the world. And it is not a sign of development, as the IT cell would have you believe, because we have seen the quality of roads, we have seen how many bridges have collapsed. It is just pollution. In 2025, the government will no longer be able to use its media cell to silence citizens who want clarity and consistency in policy. They want less red tape, they want greater accountability, and they want a conducive environment for growth and quality of life in terms of civic amenities, good roads, public transport, adequate healthcare, and a decent education system. In fact, more and more Indians are traveling abroad and they witness the low cost and high quality infrastructure that is taken for granted. Basics, good roads are a basic. And this is available in Southeast Asian countries, which were once poor, which are still not aspiring to be a superpower, but they give a better quality of life. So the debate about higher taxes not translating to tangible improvements is bound to intensify in 2025, and it should. It's also going to focus attention on India's pathetic failure to exploit our outstanding tourism potential. Indians are going abroad, countries are changing their visa rules and, introducing Indian restaurants to attract Indian tourists. What's happening in India? People don't want to travel anymore because of bad infrastructure, bad connectivity, full flights, not enough flights available, and extremely high costs and taxes. What a contrast, isn't it? So tourist destinations, even those like Goa, and we have so much to offer in terms of scenic beauty and culture, is suffering a massive decline. And Indians are traveling abroad and learning that you should aspire and demand better quality of life. In fact, these are middle class concerns because the middle class is going abroad and seeing the world firsthand. So their complaints are going to rise. They're not going to stop talking. And it's going to be amplified this year with the demand to reduce tax burdens. I mean, all the ridiculous debate about taxing of popcorn shows you how much of public anger there is. And we are still going to demand better water supply, healthcare, like I talked before, and to demand that government officials and politicians crack down on corruption and become accountable. We are hoping that the square year is going to see these changes. On the financial front, middle class and affluent investors who surged to the capital market after 2020 are going to face a lot of concerns. They saw nothing but a continuous bull run. And this accounts for the bulk of investors in the market. They've seen a relentless rally, huge revival of initial public offerings, and now it's all turned a little shaky. Markets have been going down, and investors don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with the decline, and they expect and depend on the government to ensure a stable economic environment, strict enforcement and oversight, regulator who works, and who ensures that there's an end to corporate malpractices. In this situation, the government's unwillingness to even examine allegations of conflict of interest and more against Madhvi Puri Puch, chairperson of the Securities and Exchange Board of India, has actually cast a shadow on the regulatory process and the independence of the market regulator. So the regulator can keep coming up with different kinds of papers and rules, but this is an overhang because it's just not addressed. The government's attitude is nothing to see over here. It has also enhanced the recurring concern of favoritism and how government policies have disproportionately benefited one industry group, the Adanis. And this can be factually proven. Both these concerns will continue in 2025, will continue to make headlines, simply because they haven't been addressed. So, as India steps into 2025, it stands at the crossroads. The aspirations of 1.4 billion people are clear. They want economic growth that's inclusive and equitable. They want better governance, transparency, and accountability. And they want infrastructure that matches global standards, not going to put up with bad infrastructure, bad roads anymore. Nostalgia for past leadership serves as a reminder also another set of values: decency, honesty, and some kind of cultural ethos in our public life, which ought to guide the nation's future. Whether the government can rise to meet these expectations remains to be seen, but the demand for change is unmistakable. If you agree and you want this to happen, do share and amplify. Thank you.